welcome everybody.
Hello, everyone. We're just gonna let people stream in for the next couple of minutes like we've done the last couple of times. Welcome to the Return to Work Best Practices, part 3 of this 5-part webinar series. We're gonna get started here in a couple minutes, but in the meantime, like we did on Tuesday, which seemed to do pretty well and get people seem to enjoy it, we're gonna pop up a poll question here to see how you all feel about how much you know about commuting and how employees feel about it. So I'm going to just launch this poll out to everyone. Feel free to put your response in there, what you believe. What percentage of employees think their company hasn't taken enough action to alleviate commuting concerns? This is from a couple of studies, primarily from ADP and Robert Half. So I'll give you, just a minute more or so as people stream in. Feel free to respond to that poll question. We'll give you the answer and then we'll get started.
This should be an interesting one.
Yeah, this one's, I like this one. It's pretty interesting. All right, so if you're just coming in, we're just waiting a couple more seconds here to get started. We've got this poll question up. I'm going to close the polling now. So get your answer in. What percentage of employees think their company hasn't taken enough action to alleviate commuting concerns? And the answer is indeed 60%, and the majority of
it is.
Over half of
Wow.
Of employees think that their company hasn't taken enough action. So this is certainly a big issue for you all at companies and cities, but additionally for employees themselves. So just a little fun before we get started. But we're going to launch in now to the webinar. So I'm going to pass it over to Josh to get us started. Josh?
Awesome. Thank you, Andy, and welcome everybody. If this is your first time at one of our webinars, this is a 5-part series, as Andy was saying. This is the 3rd one. In the previous 2, we looked at data and how to gather data and making the most of that data for making those informed decisions for when your employees return to work. We offered an analysis of that data and shown how you could really make the most of people working at home right now, figuring out what their intentions are, so your facilities and your company aren't overwhelmed if everybody decides to drive single occupancy vehicles on day 1 of the return. Today's webinar is all about implementation. So if you haven't joined us before, we're happy to share some of the previous webinars, which I've just put into the chat section for you guys to see. Couple things as we go through this webinar, we'd love to have questions and dialogue back and forth. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen there. Feel free to just ask us questions. There's 3 panelists on this webinar, so we can answer the questions and everybody can see them if you type it in, or at the end, we can answer them and address them. We're gonna have 10 minutes at the end just for Q&A. It's just a 30-minute webinar. We like to keep these short and crisp to really give you guys the opportunity to get the most out of it in terms of value and then ask questions because we wanna help at the end of the day. So I think we have enough people coming in now, and let's just go ahead and introduce our panelists. All right, let's change the slide there. And I am Josh, by the way, and with Commutifi, Commutifi being the data analytics software company. And I work in sustainable commute integrations with companies and TMAs. And our second panelist today is Bobby Lauderyoung, who is with Beeline Mobility. Beeline works as a consultant in transportation, helping folks just like any company or any TMAs working with individual companies to help them implement their programs. So we're going to hear a lot about how implementation works in a post-COVID-19 world. And Andy Keaton is a colleague of mine at Commutifi, and Andy is as our resident expert, as we like to call him, in all things data. And Andy brings a wealth of information to all the different ways that data can help inform our mobility decisions. So I think that today what we are going to do is really ask the question, how would you implement a carpool or shuttle program? How would you implement different programs now that COVID-19 is here? And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Bobby to take it from here.
Excellent. Thank you, Josh. I will go ahead and share my screen if Andy, perfect. There we go. Excellent. Josh, can you just confirm that you can see this?
I sure can.
Excellent. So as Josh mentioned, the prior two webinars were focused on collecting data that'll help you answer really key questions that are necessary in order to draft a really effective return to work plan post-COVID. But then also the second component of that is once you collect that data, understanding what story that data is telling you. With the free analysis that Beeline and Commutifi are offering, we're providing you with a tailored return to work survey that you can distribute to your employees if you feel comfortable to do so. Get an analysis back from us, and that will highlight where we believe you might have areas of opportunity, low-hanging fruit, or be able to, through process of elimination, determine where you're going to allocate your investment priorities as you begin to rephase employees back in. So today what we're going to be talking about is less about how to determine which components of your program to focus on, and more about how to actually implement those effectively in a pre-COVID scenario versus a post-COVID scenario. So to set a quick agenda, we're going to look at what a typical implementation looks like. Now, this is, speaking candidly here, Beeline Mobility, we provide services in the way of planning, in the way of implementing, in the way of program management and optimization. So I'm going to be sharing with you what a typical implementation looks like when we are hired to be able to provide these services. It doesn't necessarily mean that these are best practices that most employers share, rather, again, Beeline's best practices. Then we're going to look at how you can take those best practices and consider which of those things you can still continue to do, which ones you can't. And for the ones you can't, what are good substitutes to consider? And then we're going to talk about the role that having a commute catalog, such as Commutifi, will play in your return to work strategy. So first, the implementation strategy. I want to just kind of set the tone with this question: how do you typically implement your commuter programs? Well, this is how we typically see it here at Beeline, and how we tend to work with Commutifi to be able to provide our clients a really seamless implementation. So first, it's always really powerful to have a visioning workshop with your leadership. So after you've identified your organization's areas of key focus, say it's going to be focusing on carpooling during ranching. Maybe your plan is to provide community shuttles on a temporary basis, or formalize your telework and flex work policies. Whatever that is, you're going to need to be able to communicate that to your employees. And before you get there, before you even get to the planning of how you're going to communicate that to employees, the single most important step, in our opinion, is making sure that you're meeting with leadership to get their true, genuine buy-in and support for the solutions that you're recommending to be implemented and how you think those should be implemented. Planning. Don't move forward without a commute catalog, whether it's Commutifi or something else. If you're not going to collect data, you're going to lack the agility and adaptability required to be able to optimize programs and make sure that you're not spending money that is being wasted, or due to lack of adoption of said benefits. You'll also want to investigate potential solutions, work with human resources and facilities to plan events and communication. So during that initial visioning workshop, it's not only about getting true buy-in from your C-suite, be it the CFO, the CEO, whoever's going to be that C-suite champion for you. But beyond that, it's also important to have key stakeholders from the relevant departments, such as HR, IT, facilities, to be there and be involved, especially when you get to the planning stage, where IT will likely need to be involved, particularly in the way of off-site solutions, setting up software or hardware things in the way of VPN, maybe laptops, whatever that looks like. So you want them involved as well. And lastly, again, this is a non-COVID environment. Implementation, you want to make sure that you're communicating in advance to your employees of these coming benefits, and also directly from the C-suite. Now, we talked a little bit about the buy-in that you want to get from the C-suite during the visioning workshop and having that C-suite champion. This is where that comes in handy. It would be fantastic if you could draft an email that could be edited as needed and then sent out by the C-suite, because it will be read more thoroughly and followed up on more thoroughly as well. And then providing some advanced program training for your managers is always helpful prior to doing on-site employee presentations. Again, this tends to be something this is Beeline's standard practice on a high level. It doesn't necessarily mean that other employers or cities or TMAs are always doing on-site presentations, but it's something that our team has found to be really effective, is getting in the trenches and answering questions directly. So we know what works, but what do we do now? This is one of my very good friends and one of my clients, Ryan Knutson at SSA Marine, for which we've launched a last mile shuttle for, and used a lot of these, if not all of these best practices to be able to deliver really key results. But, a lot of the work that Ryan and I did 2 or 3 months ago, we would not even, or I should say 4 or 5 months ago, we would not be able to do today. So what does implementation during COVID-19 actually look like? And here's the next question that I want you to consider. How do you adapt implementation best practices to meet the current climate? Well, this is, on a more granular level, this is really what we just talked about. We talked about employee presentation, I guess once we get to the implementation anyway, past the visioning workshop and the planning stage, focusing and drilling in on the implementation itself, we've really talked about 3 things: employee presentations, of course that includes participation incentives of some kind, and then one thing new that I want to touch on is personalized commute planning. So typically this is what it looks like when Beeline goes on site, and it's also best practices that we encourage all employers to offer if they have the internal resources to be able to do these things themselves. So a couple of things, I'm not going to spend too much time here, but I want to just say that outlining employee communication and implementation strategy, and again, working with the relevant teams to be able to do so. Participation incentives, food always works. Food always works. So you can see in this picture over here on the left that during a prior presentation, we had invited a espresso bar vendor to come and be there for morning presentations, but you could go as far as ordering pizza, a food truck, or if you're on more of a budget, pick up some stuff from Costco. Personalized commute planning is something that is highly effective, although proven to be very labor intensive and takes a lot of time. So there's 2 ways of going about this. You can either leverage a personalized commute planning platform such as Commutify, or you can task an internal staff member who's already there to act as an employee commute planning resource. So the problem is that a lot of what we're talking about here, we actually cannot do today. So let's talk about, how do we adapt those best practices for the current climate? Well, a return to work implementation might look like this. And while I would like to say these are best practices, none of us have ever been through something like this before. And so this is what we would like to think are best practices, and they're things that we'll say are options to consider. So for the employee presentations task, you can still do virtual presentations. Again, you've already had your visioning workshop that included IT/HR facilities, and you've already been working with those folks consistently on the planning of your implementation anyway. So work with them to provide virtual presentations via Zoom or something along those lines. Now, an example service provider for someone who can do this for you would be myself. But of course, if you have the resources internally, you can feel free to absolutely do that. And as you should, because your employees know you. In addition to those virtual presentations via Zoom or something like that, recording video tutorials that can live on an internal wiki, or ideally a commute catalog is a really effective way to be able to communicate changes and be able to communicate those changes in advance of your return to work plan. Participation incentives. Well, we can't have an espresso bar and we can't order pizza unless you're cool enough to send it to everyone's house. So perhaps, continuing with just raffles, drawings, and prizes for attendees. And this could be as simple as emailing out a $20 Starbucks or Amazon gift card for attendees. So perhaps having management, the direct managers take attendance of their personal employees and submitting that to HR is a great way to do that. And then there are some free tools online. You can simply Google free randomized drawing, and there are some tools out there that'll tell you on your spreadsheet, okay, 14 is the random number. Find out who the number on your spreadsheet is. It's Jane Doe. Great, that's the winner. So there's some really easy and cost-effective ways to do that. And then personalized commute planning, which we talked about as well. While you likely will not be able to meet with employees face-to-face any longer, fortunately, we do have technology such as Commutifi that can prepare those personalized and tailored mobility plans for each employee. So here's what we believe on a higher level to back out of the granularity of what some of those options look like. Here are the three big takeaways that I'll want you to leave with today. So first, ask your employees. At Beeline, we like to say that the people that are closest to the problem are always likely to be the ones that are going to have the solution or be able to tell you what that potential solution is. So if you're trying to solve a problem for those folks, ask them what they think the solution might be. You can do this by conducting a survey. If you're trying to avoid survey fatigue, do a virtual town hall and let the folks using Zoom, just as we're conducting this webinar, and let folks chime in on the chat channel or the raise my hand feature to be able to share their thoughts, and you can gather some interest that way. COVID tailored planning. So consider how you would prefer to learn about your commute options during this time. Just do some self-reflection and ask yourself how would because you're likely to be in the same situation. So ask yourself, how do you want to learn about your options for getting to work? And as I mentioned, you could consider filming short video tutorials or have an outside consultant such as myself do that for you. Although, and this doesn't need to be a large production. This can be done on iPhone and can be really cool being done with just 2 or 3 managers who want to participate voluntarily. You can also do advanced manager training and team meetings. And what I mean by that is, while I mentioned advanced manager training previously, where you can actually hold meetings on site, train your managers so that they're aware of what benefits and changes are going to be offered to their employees. While that's always helpful, now it's more or less essential in this current climate, in the sense that what we would want to do is have advanced manager trainings that are held over Zoom or another virtual tool, and then task the managers with meeting with their teams individually and communicating that to them, and encourage the management to lead by example by taking an alternative commute mode that is not driving alone. And of course, dedicated Slack channels or Microsoft Teams, whatever you use, that's always effective as well. And then lastly, employees will no longer just be able to walk into HR with questions, and email is not going to be the most organized method of communication. So my recommendation is to establish a dedicated communication resource for commute assistance. That way you can keep it all in one place and measure it. So I'm going to wrap up here, but I want to talk about the power of commute catalogs during this time. So first of all, because we're not on site, it's more difficult to streamline employee messaging and communication. So we need to find a way to automate that. Commute catalogs such as Commutifi have automated benefit enrollment. I tend to recommend this directly to my client for this reason, even if in a non-COVID era. But the streamlined benefits messaging is really effective because the employees can both learn about and enroll in the benefits at the same time, which helps from an administrative perspective as well. This is extremely effective because, again, either you can hire somebody to sit on Zoom and do personalized commute planning with employees, or you can leverage technology to be able to automate tailored mobility plans for each employee. And so it'll basically show you how to use the new benefits and programs that you're rolling out to be able to provide employees with the most effective commute options for them in one place. And then, of course, data collection. None of us really know what's going to be happening right now. It's really, really crucial and critical to ensure that everything and anything that you're doing right now, you are measuring the success of in order to be able to remain, as I said, agile and adaptable, but most importantly, to be able to report true return on investment for and to your leadership. With that, I am going to transition it back to Andy, I believe.
Perfect. Thank you, Bobby. That's great. I think at this point, we are ready to move on to any questions that you might have. Before we kind of get there, just want to remind everyone of this free analysis that we're providing Beeline and Commutifi. It's simple to get started, and we'll send over after you survey your commuters. We'll send over an analysis that we talked about on Tuesday. So if you missed that one, go ahead and check out the recording. Once again, all of this is free, and we're just trying to kind of help everyone get back into the swing of things. That being said, before we start answering questions, I just want to let everyone know about the next webinar. We've changed the date to Thursday, May 21st instead of Tuesday. We accidentally overscheduled the Luminary 20 event brought to you by Loom. So the link's there at the bottom as well. If you haven't heard of this event, it's a really good, interesting commute event. So go ahead and check it out. We didn't want to, try to schedule something at the same time. So we're going to push this next one off to Thursday. We'll be talking a bit about resilience planning. And we will have a couple of guests on as well, talking about what they're doing in the mobility space to help for this. So that being said, let's open it up to questions. If you have any for any of us, Bobby, Josh, or I, about how to implement programs once you've done the analyzing and planning, or in fact, if you have really any questions, we're happy to answer them. Feel free to submit them in the Q&A option on the bottom of your screen there, and we'll get to them. All right.
Andy, here's a question. Popped up. Why would my leadership consider outsourcing implementation and program management services rather than doing it internally?
I'll take that one. Yeah, that's a great question. So the fact of the matter is that not all employers require outside assistance to be able to do this. Each organization is truly a snowflake. They all have different challenges. They all have unique values, and so because of that, it is possible that you could tap an internal staff member to be able to handle your commute program. The really core things that are necessary in order to accomplish that, in my opinion, are ensuring that the person has some level of data experience, but is also personally driven to be able to remain involved and understand that if you're not continuously keeping your commuter program fresh, it is growing stale. And so it does require a significant amount of work in order for it to be successful and achieve whatever your organizational goals are through your investment priorities. That said, not all companies, or I guess in that same breath, I'll say not all companies can necessarily afford or have a budget for outside consultants such as Beeline Mobility to come in and help plan, implement, or manage these things. And I would say that there's no secret to the work that my team does it just takes time and it just takes bandwidth. And if you have those resources internally and also have a really effective communication team as well as stakeholders that are truly bought in, and you have that buy-in, you can wrangle your team together and get them to support the work that you're doing. That's really how you know whether or not you need an outside consultant or not.
Awesome. Looks like we have another question here about that free analysis and getting started, as well as we'd mentioned a white paper. So question is, where can I get the white paper, and how do I get started with the analysis, and then what kind of actually comes out of the analysis? So we talked about this a bit on Tuesday. Josh, if you can put those links back up in the chat bar, we've got a link.
There it is. I just put in the chat and responded to the question there.
Perfect. Okay, so yeah, we've got the link here to find the white paper, and we also have a sample, an example data analysis as well that we can put the link to, so you can take a look at what you would get as a output from doing this. And as we talked on Tuesday, but I'll remind you if you missed that webinar. This is usually pretty quick. It's really up to how quickly you want to move through the process. So we recommend giving a few days to get surveys completed from your commuters. It's a great time now because commuters are normally spending, 30 minutes to an hour each day commuting, and now they're not. So they have a little free time. So, it takes 2 minutes to fill out this survey. That's a pretty good ROI on time. And then once we get a good critical mass, then we'll send over that analysis, which is done automatically.
Right. Yeah, here's a question for our attendees. Are there any things that you are considering that you'd like validation on, or some direction or tips on how to investigate those potential solutions or how to go about doing that? If so, you can feel free to put those questions in the chat bar and we can address things a little bit more specific to your organization.
Great. Thanks, Bobby. And also, one of the things that we've been hearing a lot about over this last week is what to do. People are really guessing what their employees' return to work programs look like. And that's really where this all came about. As a data analytics company in the commuter space, Commutifi said, hey, why don't we just give the tool out so we can actually look at some of this data and help HR staff, TMAs, really anybody who's got a responsibility for their commuter program, the tools they need to really understand how to get back to work. So that's what we're talking about here. That's what that free analysis is. And that all rolls up into these implementation strategies that we're talking about on this webinar. So please, last time we had this webinar, we received a number of emails afterwards. We want to encourage you to do just the same. Andy, if we could put our email addresses up there on the screen, please feel free to shoot me an email, Josh at Commutifi or Bobby at Beeline Mobility, or feel free to call us on the phone if you're old school like us. We'll be happy to talk to you about getting you that analysis link, and also keep you informed in the conversation that we're having with all these major companies that we're talking to and dealing with as we all go through this COVID-19 together. So doesn't look like there's another question there, but I just wanted to reiterate again, next week, our friends at Loom are having Luminary. We're going to be participating and joining that. And our next webinar is going to be the following Thursday. So I wanted to thank everybody. I wanted to thank our panelists for sharing this valuable information. We're going to have a link that's going to be sent out to everybody who registered for this event. That's going to have a recording of this. And we certainly would love to keep the momentum going. And we want to thank everybody for participating. So thank you all very much and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you for attending.